Hi, my name is Chip Dumais, UCAPP instructor and Cooperative Educational Services Executive Director. Today we're going to talk about bar charts and pie graphs and working with data, creating powerful presentations by incorporating alternative ways of presenting data as well as ways to accentuate data, either with formatting or with images that make for more powerful takeaways. This presentation will include elements of the PSEL, or Professional Standards for Educational Leaders standards, 4E, 8C, and 8I, as well as ISTE standards, 3.1C and 3.5D. As you can see on the left-hand side, now that we've covered standards, we're going to go into ways to share data, a couple examples of bar and pie graphs, some things that go beyond bar and pie graphs, a little bit about images and telling stories, a couple examples of some really creative ways to share data, a couple of examples of looking at what the takeaway should be as opposed to what the numbers are, and then a quick piece at the end about two really important pieces about avoiding distortions, ways that people use graphs and charts that aren't appropriate, and closing with the bottom line. There are a number of situations where we're presenting data to a group, and while this data might be valid and accurate and important, it's really hard to process. And at a minimum, if I'm in a situation where I need to present this amount of data, and then what I really need to be able to do is add some type of supports that will help guide the recipient of this information to what I'm trying to get them to look at. So instead of trying to direct you to the Czech Republic, if you look at the Czech Republic and absolute realization of budget, while you're looking for those things, you're missing all the other points. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply add a couple of really simple graphical supports, arrows and circles or ovals or boxes that bring you directly to the piece of data that I would like you to see. More often than not, this volume of data, will go right over somebody's head. It's really hard to pull out the big message. So as we start to consolidate data a little bit more, we end up with relationships that are important. So here is a set of clustered columns. So there's a blue column that represents town 1, an orange column represents town 2, and a gray column represents town 3. You can see that this goes over year 1 to year 6, so I have time, I have towns, and I have some numerical value that in this case is associated with money. And of course the first question becomes not just what's the trend, but there'll be somebody in the audience who is concerned about what the actual numerical value is. And so you can very easily in Excel or in Sheets add the data table that goes along with the graph directly below. So let me go ahead and show you exactly how to do that. So we're going to switch screens here. You can see that I have similar data. I have some X, Y, Z, A, B, C, and some numbers associated with it so that it has a clustered column here. And the data is presented at the bottom. Well, if I click on the chart, the way that I got that to happen is under Design here, there is this section called Add Chart Element. And under Add Chart Element are a number of options. I would encourage you to explore these. The one that we're using right now is Data Table. I can remove the data table. I can add the data table and include the legend on the left-hand side, or I can add the data table and exclude the legend. So adding numerical data to a powerful graph is as easy as adding the data table below. Pie charts, and some people are a big fan of pie charts and some not. Here's the most important thing about a pie chart. You'll notice that in this case I've got formative, interim, and summative assessments. No numbers associated with it, but the one condition for a pie chart is that it represents the whole. So this would have to be 100% of the types of assessments. So if every assessment falls into one of those three categories, I've done a good job making this pie chart. It has limited data, it's easy to read, and it represents 100% of what I'm looking at. There are some bad examples of bar charts and pie charts. This time of bar chart or column graph clearly has far too much data. The fact that it's three-dimensional is not helpful either. And aside from the fact that it's a little fuzzy, even if it were clear, it would make it really hard to pull trends or patterns out of this data. Similar to this one. Here's a pie chart. Technically correct. As far as functionality, it really is not that good. Far too many categories, far too distracting, and it doesn't necessarily give the reader or the recipient something to take away other than you're not really good at pie charts. Why stick with just bar and pie charts or bar and pie graphs when there's so many other options for presenting data? So I'd like to show you a couple that are either raw data that's just been accentuated or different formats to show the data in. The first one is just a regular Excel sheet. So you can see I have two columns. I have a quarter 3 and a quarter 4 grade. I got the average of some things, a minimum, an SAT. But what you notice here is that there are three things going on. One is that I've used conditional formatting. Instead of forcing somebody to read through a list of numbers and identify the one that's the greatest or the one that's the smallest, I can go ahead and I can add conditional formatting very easily to a set of data and instantly draw somebody's attention to the items that I think are important. The second item here are sparklines. Now in this case I've used sparklines that are small column graphs. I'll show you how to do sparklines that are line graphs in just a second. But here's another way that I can show somebody visually the trend in the data as opposed to having them try to figure it out by looking at the numbers. And the last thing is this bubble chart or bubble graph. And the reason that I included it here is that so many times when people are making graphs and charts, they limit themselves to only two pieces of data, the X and the Y axis. But by using something like a bubble chart, I can show by the size of the data point a third dimension. So I should be thinking beyond 2 dimensions when I'm making graphs and charts. So let me go ahead and show you. So I've taken some data here. Excuse me. What I have is I have a student number, and then I've added some artificial quiz grades here, quizzes 1 through 5. And I've calculated the average of those quiz grades. The way I've calculated the average actually is that this cell is equal to the average of those before it, and I simply copied that down. Now, if I'm sharing this with a faculty, or if I'm sharing this with a board, or I'm sharing it with somebody who I would like to make interpretations from the data or conclusions from the data, one way would be to take a look at the average. But the other thing is that, you know what, let's go ahead and add some color to this data to show somebody immediately those concern areas. So in this case, if I select the data and I'm on the Home tab in this version of Excel, it would also work in Sheets. If you move down here, you see this option for conditional formatting. And if I click on the little arrow in the corner there, it'll give me a number of options. The options I encourage you to explore, the one that I'm going to use is called color scales. And the first color scale, whoa, maybe I won't use color scale. Wow, that's a little bit scary. There's a little bit too much information there. But that's called a heat map, where the stuff that is positive is in green, the stuff that is generally negative is in red. Maybe instead, what if we took this data and it was important to show teachers in this grade level the top and the bottom. So we'll go ahead and we'll take a look at the bottom 10%. Now, it actually gives me the option to change the percentage number and change what the format looks like. I'm going to leave it the way it is. It'll be red text and it'll be a light red background for the bottom 10% of the data. And right away, I get a visual representation, what makes it looks like like, well, quiz 3 probably was the one that kids in general did the worst on. Watch what happens. This is dynamic as well. So if I change this 8 to a 2 or a 1, there we go. So if I change it to a value that is below that 10% as far as the grades, it automatically reformats. If I change this 1 to a 7, it automatically reformats. So that's kind of neat. I'm going to use the heat map on the average scores here. So I select all the scores, go back to conditional formatting, go back to that color scale, and I'm going to choose the first heat map. So you notice that the highest grades here on average, 7.2, 7.2 are in dark green. The lowest, 2.6, is in a dark red. A light red is 3.2. So now I've taken a number of pieces of data and I've given somebody a quick visual cue as to some of the priorities here. Let's take a look at those sparklines, see if we can reproduce those too. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the insert menu. And if you cruise across the insert menu, you'll see sparklines. Sparklines are small graphs that fit within a cell. So I'm going to click on the line graph, and it's going to ask me what would I like to use for the data for that. So I'm going to go to my spreadsheet. I'm going to select those quiz grades. And where do I want to put it? I'm going to put it right there. Click OK. And look what I get. I get a small graph. And let's go ahead and change this data. Let's make that quiz grade right there a 7. Now you watch the graph over here while I change this data piece to a 7. Dynamic, it changes it automatically. And sparklines can be copied down. So this one represents data in this row. Let's say that you wanted to format these sparklines a little bit differently. I can go to the Design tab and choose to identify, well, let's find out what point in time, if these quizzes are in chronological order, that student had their highest score. Wow, this student near the end of that period. This student started off strong. This student started off strong. This student near the end of that period. So lots of important information I can pull up graphically. And the last thing is I'm going to show you that bubble chart. So I made one for you here. Let's just say that I have 5 schools. And at each school I have a certain enrollment and I have a certain class size. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to show the school on the horizontal axis. And this is a little bit of a problem because Excel, you have to trick it a little bit in order to get the names of the schools down there, but that's maybe the next session. Here are the enrollments, and you can see that the size of the circle represents the average class size. Now, you know what I like to do? Since I can't get those names down here right now, I'm going to go ahead and see if I can format these data points. So I'm going to go to Design, Add Chart Element, Data Labels. So let's see if we can get data labels. Yeah, that's not helpful, but there's the data label. I'm going to go to More Data Label Options, and what it should bring up is a window on the right-hand side of the screen. Here we go. And it's going to say exactly what field you want that label to be. So I'm going to get rid of the Y value. I don't want enrollment. Whoops. Let's go back there again. Label options. I'm going to get rid of that Y value, and instead I'm going to put the X value in. So now I have a chart that gives me each of the school names, and this circle is representative of the average class size. Here, I can prove it to you. Let's change the enrollment at Pluto to 775. Of course, it moves it up there. And let's change the average class size in Pluto to 26. Great. 3 pieces of data all on a 2-dimensional chart. You may already be familiar with other ways to represent data. Here's one that comes directly from my phone. This is a Google step counter, and you can see that in this particular month, on each particular day, while it doesn't give the actual number of steps, I get a visual representation of the fact that it looks like the 14th was the day that I walked the farthest. You can also see that it appears as though there's more walking done on the weekends. But again, trends and patterns with a visual, much different than a list of the number of steps that I've taken on any particular day. Maps are great visualizations of data or information. In this case, it may not be numbers, it may simply be a list. You may notice that by the colors here, discounting black, those are the RESC regions in Connecticut. It just so happens that I made this map using a program that I'm drawing of Tableau, Tableau Public. It's not a simple program to use, but it's a very powerful program, and it is free. And so I included a list of towns that we happen to interact with, and that's how we made this. So let me show you something that's a little bit easier than Tableau. Google Data Studio. Google Data Studio is nice because I can create dynamic graphs and charts that I can share, and anybody with access to that sees it in essentially real time. You can change how it updates. So I can include data and have a dynamic data presentation. Let me give you an example. So I'm going to go to my Google search bar, or my web search bar for that matter. And I'm going to go ahead and type in datastudio.google.com. We could do an entire different or separate tutorial on Data Studio. I'm just going to show you an example of how powerful it is and how quickly you can go ahead and get up to speed on some of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go to create. I'm going to create a data source, and when I do, it's going to ask me where I'd like to get that data from. Now, it turns out that I have already gotten the data. Here's where I went to get the data. I'm going to make a chart that shows the non-white percentage of students in districts across the state by town. So I went to the Ed site page. I clicked on students, and from students I selected this past year, 2021. I picked all districts. I didn't select any schools because I wanted it to list just a district. And then I filtered by race and ethnicity. This may take a second to generate. Well, there you go. Right here is a link to download the CSV. CSV stands for comma separated variable. It's essentially a spreadsheet with all of the formatting gunk removed. It's just a number and a comma, or a piece of data and a comma, and then the next piece of data. So what I did is I downloaded this and I cleaned it up just a little bit. So let me go ahead and show you how I cleaned it up. This is what it looks like for me. So I pulled out of here the town associated with each piece of data. And then based on the number of, or total number of students and the total number of non-white students, I found the non-white percentage for each one of these districts. I saved this file, and we're going to go ahead and see what happens in Data Studio. So let's go back to Data Studio. I'm going to go to File, Upload. Now you can see that I've already uploaded the file, so I don't have to. What I would do is I'd click on Upload, and I would go to that file on my drive. But here it is already. So once I click on that file, it gives me the option to connect it to the presentation that I'm going to make. So I'm going to go ahead and connect. Now, here's my data. It has taken the district name and the non-white percentage. It has formatted it. It has determined what the record count is here. And then we're going to go ahead and all we have to do is create report. Let me show you what happens now that the data is in there. Create report is going to bring up a blank screen or a blank sheet that I can share on the web. And what it's going to do, it's going to create a graph or a chart for me already. So it's looking at the data and it's saying, well, what's the most reasonable thing to present based on what Chip put in there for data? And it was the district and how many of them there are. Now, of course, there's only one of each. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to delete this. What I am going to do, though, is I'm going to add a chart. And you can see that the multitude of the types of chart that I can add. I'm going to add a map. I'm going to add a map that is a bubble map. It asks me where I want to put it. I'm going to put it right here. Now, it says, hey, the configuration is incomplete. Well, that's because I haven't configured it at all. And what it's asking me for over here is it's saying, hey, what is the location? Well, the location is actually the district. So I'm just going to grab district. The location now is the district. The next thing is, it's still not complete. It has to have something to map. So if you take a look at these options, tooltip. Tooltip is what you get when you mouse over something. Color dimension. If I want to vary the color by a particular variable, I can put it here. The size of that bubble, that's what I want to change. So I want schools that have a small percentage of non-white students to have a small bubble, schools that have a large percentage to have a large bubble. So that's my non-white percent. I'm going to drag that and put it in size. It now has enough data and the right data to create a map. All of the map data is in the Google Data Studio already. And look what I get. I get a map of the state of Connecticut, town, with a bubble the size of the percentage of non-white students. We can scroll in. We can move the map. We can scroll out. You know what? When you look at this and you go, holy cow, and you scroll out, it still probably is too much data. The tooltip happens automatically. All I have to do is scroll over the point. It shows me what town it is and what percentage. Let's do something that's really easy. Let's add a control. If I go, well, let's add a slider. I'm going to put the slider right here. And what it does automatically is it says, well, what do you think that Chip wants to use in the slider? And it pulls my control field, which is the non-white percentage of students. It finds the minimum value, which is 0.05, puts it here. Finds the maximum value, which is 0.92, and puts it here. Now watch what happens as I dynamically change this. Let's drag this. Same map, fewer data points, changes the scale. Let's do it even lower. So ladies and gentlemen, these are the districts with the lowest percentages of non-white students in the state of Connecticut. Here you go. Canterbury, Hampton, Pomfret, Hebron. We can do the other side of the scale. If the data changes, there is a refresh rate on here. It'll refresh as well. Imagine that you actually included more than 1 year's worth of data. You could have add a control. I could put in a drop-down list that included different years. All right, let's switch back to here. So this happens to be 2 graphs that I made previously, and I just copied and screenshotted for you. The first one is non-white staff. This one is non-white students. Again, I could put a chart up or a table with 200 pieces of data, or I could present to my board or my staff or the community a graphic like this that shows the data. The slide, of course, is called irony because it has more words on it than any other slide that I've shown so far in this presentation. But my point is that sometimes concepts don't get transmitted or shared well with numbers. Instead, a visual helps people to understand the concept or understand um, the relationship. You've probably all seen the one with the fence, and but again, important concept, hard to describe sometimes, but very, very easy with a visual. In terms of creativity, this one is a graph or a chart from 1869. Menard made this, and it is an example of 6 or 7 pieces of data or pieces of information. They're included in a single chart. This is Napoleon's March on Moscow, and some of the things that you can see here are the graph on the bottom actually represents temperature as a function of time as they traveled through on their journey. You have a beige line and a black line. The beige line is advancing towards Moscow. The black line is retreating from Moscow. You have the thickness of the line. The thickness of the line in this case represents the number of troops. Wonderful graphical representation of people dying along the way before they even got to Moscow. So this is not a new concept. Finding creative ways to include multiple pieces of data and information in a single graph has been around for a long time, and it's still extremely powerful. Another graph or chart that people use too infrequently when presenting budgets, really people care about the relationship between one category or one line item and another. This is called a tree chart. It is something that is available in either Google Sheets or in Microsoft Excel. And again, it uses multiple variables to present a graphic of information. So the size of the box is associated with how much is being spent. And since there is more than one box, you can see that there is more than one variable that can be used here. Sometimes, even when we're presenting text, you might recognize this from the Connecticut Common Core of Teaching rubric for effective teaching. It's domain 2. There's a lot of information in here, and I may be presenting this to staff. What is it conceptually here that I want people to take away? Sometimes an image is better, right? This is about working and refining and polishing in order to move forward in our skills and abilities. So sometimes a visual can also be used with text, doesn't have to always be numbers. A couple of things to avoid. The first thing is getting back to the pie chart. The number one mistake on pie charts is that people represent something that doesn't add up to 100%. This doesn't really have any meaning in terms of a pie chart. 65%, 70%, 60%, you're using the wrong chart.